Our exhibit is Discrimination and Persecution, and over here we have all of the different groups that were persecuted. Usually when we think of the Holocaust, we just think of the Jews being targeted, but there were many other groups that were targeted as well. We have the Gypsies and the Polish, who were considered to be racially inferior, and we have the Jehovah's Witnesses. Just like the Jews, they were subjected to very intense persecution, and they were targeted because they were opposed to both war and government, and it was said that they had international connections. Germany was a little bit intimidated of these international connections, so they decided that if there were no Jehovah's Witnesses, there would be no international connections to worry about. The Soviet prisoners of war, just because of them being prisoners, they found them to be dangerous, and they found them as a threat. Germany didn't want to be intimidated of anyone else. They wanted everyone to be intimidated of them, so that's why they targeted the prisoners of war. Homosexuals were believed to be weak men who weren't able to fight for the nation, so they were basically useless. They also weren't able to produce and increase the German birth rate, so anything that diminished that birth rate would be considered a racial danger. The mentally and physically disabled people were considered to be life unworthy of life, which basically means that there was no reason for them to be living, and there was no reason for them to be on Earth. So they also were thought to be a genetic and financial burden to the German state. Our last group here, the Afro-Germans, African Germans were considered also to be a threat, but not the same threat as the Soviet prisoners of war. Soviet prisoners of war were a dangerous threat. Afro-Germans were a threat to the pure race, the pure German race. Hitler wanted every German to be a pure Aryan, which was blonde hair, blue eyes, white fair skin, and strong to fight for the country. But since Afro-Germans were not white, they weren't part of that pure German race. So that's basically the only reason they were targeted for, was because of their color.
On April 1st of 1933, Nazi guards started to discourage people from coming and shopping and doing business with the Jews. They started to threatening to physically hurt those who went and did business with them. From these pictures, we could see that the German word for Jude, was started to be graffitied on the windows of shops and businesses. They did that so that the businesses were easily identifiable and so that people would not shop there. Here, in July 14th of 1933, there was a new law passed called the Prevention of Offsprings with Hereditary Diseases Law. This led to the forced sterilization of many groups, including the Jewish people, the Gypsies, Polish people, Jehovah's Witnesses, Afro-Germans, and many others. From 1933 to 1935, it was officially taught in German schools that anyone who is not a purebred Aryan or purebred German was racially inferior. The way that Jewish children were segregated from German children was very similar to the way that black children were segregated from white children during the U.S. Civil War times. Jewish children were not allowed to swim in the pools, go to playgrounds, or participate in sports and activities that associated with the German race. In May of 1935, No Jews Allowed signs were starting to be posted outside of German villages, shops, and restaurants. This sign right here reads, "Jews Not Welcome." On September 15th of 1935, the Nuremberg laws were put into place. This means that every Jew was stripped of their rights as a human being. Jews were now not able to vote, marry, have children, or defend themselves. This means that if someone committed a crime towards a Jew, they were not able to fight for justice because they were no longer considered a citizen. On November 9th through 11th, 1938, Kristallnacht, or Night of the Broken Glass, took place. It was a nationwide riot, and it resulted in hundreds of synagogues, stores, office buildings, homes, schools, and community places to be graffitied and to be vandalized by German people. The reason it was called Night of the Broken Glass was because of all these broken windows that were seen the day after. Many Jews were killed, beaten, and tortured and taken to prison camps that night.
On November 15, 1938, Jewish kids were officially prohibited from attending German schools. This is when the segregation really started happening. They decided they didn't even want to mix children together for their impurities. On November 23, 1939, Jews in Poland were forced by Germans to start wearing a yellow Star of David on their chest or a blue and white armband with the Star of David on it. But the Jews weren't the only ones who had to wear an armband or a badge. For example, homosexuals had to wear a pink triangle on their chest. On May 1st to May 7, 1940, about 154,000 Polish Jews were imprisoned in the Lodz ghettos. The Lodz ghettos weren't necessarily concentration camps where they started exterminating them, but they were more like segregated cities. So now instead of just schools that were segregated, there were entire cities that were segregated. And if you see on this picture, the Lodz ghettos were really unsanitary and they didn't get very much food and lots of diseases spread. On May 20, 1940, Auschwitz, a major concentration camp in Poland, was established. This is when the extermination really started happening for the Jews and the other groups persecuted. And this is the entrance, and it means work sets one free. Obviously, freedom probably means death from all the torture and the misfortune that was put on these persecuted groups. And this is how bad the conditions were and how crowded they were in the concentration camps. On September 1st, 1941, Jews in Germany over the age of 6 were forced to wear a Star of David on their chest, and that means even the children would be segregated now, and that means almost all German Jews were identifiable. On March 1st, 1943, most gypsies in Germany were deported to Auschwitz and Birkenau, and they were exterminated.